Good afternoon. I'm Rob Webb with TBM Partners, and I'm pleased to be hosting the third Co-Create.ai Thought Leadership interview. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jatinder Arroya, the Chief Information Security Officer of Deloitte in the UK. Jatinder has a distinguished career as a Chief Information Security Officer. Prior to Deloitte, he was with Coventry Bank in India and the UK, and also was with GE Capital and Deutsche Bank. To kick off our conversation, I asked Jatinder what were some of the major trends he's seeing in the information security landscape, given the changes in the current pandemic situation.
Thank you, Robert. A pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me here and kind of giving an overview of my career profile as well. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I'm very exciting to be here. Now, in terms of the way security profile of the industry is changing, I think everybody knows, right? With the COVID, the situation has changed dramatically. And earlier, when I started my career, it was very much about network security, firewalls, keeping the bad actors out. And now we have seen the proliferation of the data happening everywhere, and we have got so much of data all around. And this is becoming more about protecting the data, whether it's from the inside the organization, outside the organization, whether we are facing an external threats or the internal threats. So security is becoming kind of a part of day-to-day life, because almost every organization which thought we are not a technology organization, almost every organization is now a technology organization. They are processing data on one way or the other way. There is a GDPR regulation which has come in, putting more emphasis on how you secure the data from the privacy standpoint. And then we have got external actors who are, whether it's the nation state, hacktivists, or the attackers who are after the financial gains, trying to kind of go after the organization. So there is a different actors and different threats which are applicable to, depending on the industry you are in, is a healthcare versus a bank versus a professional services firm as we are. And so these security risks are kind of making it more and more important to look at this security problem holistically. So you are protecting, it's because the concept of network perimeter is also gone. It's about protecting the data, it's protecting the assets, protecting your people, and making sure you have got the right safeguards in place to be able to manage the risk. Because one thing I always talk about is there's only defined amount of money you can spend in security. So if security is like a fine balanced equilateral triangle, I call it, the cost, user experience, and also the security element to it, because otherwise it gets too imbalanced. So one simple example is, if you're going to put so much of control, your users are not able to work. So I give an example all the time that you can really make the endpoint secure if you have 20-character password, but then and 20-character password needs to change every month. You can't have last 12 months password. And suddenly what that does is people will start writing down the passwords. So you implemented a control, and now user experience has gone out of the window. It's becoming more cost expensive because service desk will keep on receiving calls to reset the password. And the intent was to secure, but it's completely gone the other way around, where people are actually doing more insecure practices because they are writing down the password because they can't remember.
So what I hear you saying is that, this integrated approach is really required, and it's a balance between, the user experience, the emerging threats, yeah, and what are the risks that exist inside the enterprise.
That's right. That's right.
What are you seeing in terms of the COVID-19 kind of change that's evolved? Got a lot more people working from home now. What are some of the new considerations that exist in that new way of working?
I think personally, I think the landscape has changed completely, Robert, because a lot of organizations didn't have this notion of working remotely, and they didn't have the controls ready or the environment set up in a way that it's everybody, when they're not going to be coming to the office. What that also means, your traffic is actually not coming into the office. So everybody's now sitting remotely. So what's happening is you're connecting to your home network. And if you think about connecting to the home network, and you may have so many internet enabled devices, a smart TV, a smart kettle, or your child might be working on a laptop or a machine. And now your boundaries have changed significantly. And what it has done is you are part of a network which is not as trusted as it is. A one vulnerable IoT device or internet-enabled device to which you may not have secured it can become an attack point, and through that, the attack can infiltrate into the organization as well. So the boundaries, the concept of boundary has diminished. So people are working and also there are challenges like, some of the younger population, they may not be working in a kind of a dedicated area. They might be sharing the space with some other people who they are sharing the accommodation with. So confidentiality comes in when you are sitting on these calls and having those discussions and working in papers, and ability to print at home changes significantly. And most importantly, what has happened is um, COVID situation has created a lot of anxiety amongst everybody, as you can imagine, the kind of stress that comes along with isolation. And attackers are now using this as a way of manipulating people, social engineering. So imagine your phishing emails. You get a phishing email now saying, "Oh, great news about the COVID vaccine or something. Click on this link to find out how you can get onto the first batch of COVID vaccine target population." And that's the way attackers are now using. They're using your emotional anxiety and the emotional quotient to get your attention, to manipulate you to do the things that you would not do otherwise. And we have seen extensive amount of phishing, smishing, and wishing kind of things happening where COVID is used as a hook to get people to do things they don't want to do and they shouldn't do.
Wow, so many new threats and
Many new threats.
employees that are anxious and trying to adjust to new ways of working. How are you, in your capacity, protecting the employees of Deloitte and your clients? What sort of advice are you giving to your
So
stakeholders?
So I think it's a fine balance. The way I always think about it is it's a fine balance between your preventative capability, having good defense mechanisms on your machines, which are now outside the perimeter that you have, a very good defense mechanism so that you are reducing the probability even something going wrong. So a simple example, if somebody has got a phishing email, which is saying, as I said, first you can click on this link supposed to be coming from the UK government and saying, would you like to be in the first trial of the vaccine, or we are releasing, would you like to be on that first batch? And if somebody's doing that and saying, I'm going to open up a form and going to basically enter the details into the form, and that's basically happening is there's something malicious injected into that to compromise your machine. So having good defense mechanism on your machines is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Things like you having some good controls where in terms of what activities are happening, or data leakage issues that may be happening on the endpoint. So you need to kind of address that. Then you also talk about having good detective mechanism controls in place, because sometimes defenses are going to fail. As a CISO, I always know and I always think that we are not going to be right all the time, so something may fail. So having a good detective capability in place to make sure we're able to detect if something feels odd, why this machine is behaving or why that user persona is behaving in that manner, and being able to pick up on that and being if very rapidly investigate and close down the door. I call window of opportunity for the attacker. And if we can reduce that, that's huge advantage, right? So having that good detective capability is so important. And then people are the best line of defense. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people say this is the weakest link. I think people are the best line of defense. So working with our people, making sure they understand what it means working in this new construct, what are the new risks that comes along with it, what they need to be mindful about, what are the things they should do and they shouldn't do, and also educating them how they can protect themselves and their families against these kind of phishing emails and attacks they see. Because if people do the right thing, when I say the right thing, a simple example, if you get in a phishing email and you report to the security department, we may be able to remove that from everybody who may have received it before they even get a chance to look at it. A one small action from one individual can really help protect the organization. And that's where I like to call a shared sense of responsibility. It's a shared responsibility to protect the film. So we are investing a lot of effort and a lot of time in educating our workforce so they understand what are those risks and how they can safeguard and how they can do their job towards protecting the organization.
Wow, that's a very powerful message, Jashinder. What I heard you say is that it's a shared responsibility. People are our strongest asset in terms
Yeah.
of their behavior. So it means educating our workforce and our clients so that we can really prevent, detect, and protect the organization kind of now that things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
Let me kind of shift gears for a moment. The technology landscape is very complex. We have many legacy systems, many modern cloud-based systems, and for the Chief Information Security Officer, it seems like there's a plethora of tools. There's not, a single pane of glass for a CISO. And I've heard that there are, in many organizations, upwards of 50 different tools that CISOs use. Kind of, how do you integrate those things? How do you,
It's an
understand how
ongoing
you
challenge, Robert.
simplify the application portfolio there?
And Robert, that's a great question, because I think that's something which is a big challenge for every organization and every CISO, because whenever you look at the tools, and I use the example, right? So you have a door, and then you keep on putting more and more locks on the door without sometimes realizing the door itself is weak. And the same thing happens. The security has evolved over the last decade or so, and new technologies have come, new threats have emerged, and and we keep on looking at point solutions to solve a specific business case or a specific security problem, rather than looking at holistically to say, what is the right security strategy? What are the right preventative controls? What's the right detective controls? What the right kind of governance measures that we need in place to look at and manage the security posture of the organization?
Mhm.
And that's where I think taking a step back and thinking that there might be some technologies which we do not even know need anymore, but we just sometimes feel uncomfortable to say what is going to happen if we actually retire that technology, so we carry on with applying more and more, and it kind of takes a bigger problem as well. So example, if everybody's now working remotely, laptops have defined computing power, and if you install more and more things on it, so security is chewing up on a lot of processing power which is not accessible to the user anymore, which
Mhm.
also creates a user experience issue, makes it very expensive to run. So integration is difficult. The reason is different vendors, they do not work well together to integrate their technologies. I think the best way I would say the integration can work is if we start looking at the use cases, what are the threats that are applicable to different parts of the user population, different parts of the organization, and applying the right controls that are required, and then also retiring the old technologies which are not needed anymore, because some new technologies have already got the right mitigations in place and can act as a compensating control. So it's more about taking zooming out of the conversation, looking at the wider picture and saying what's the right kind of investment looks like to manage the threats that are applicable today. They were not applicable, not threats which were applicable yesterday.
If we take that concept of zooming out and we'll pull up from the technology elements up to the boardroom, how are CEOs and boards measuring information security risk and compliance and governance? What sort of frameworks, what sort of processes do you see being used in the with the CISOs that you're speaking with, and maybe even in your own organization?
Yeah, I think the main thing is cyber risk is definitely one on the board agenda now. I think almost everywhere, because everybody understands the significance of cyber risk and getting it wrong, because nobody wants to get hit into the news item, in the newspaper, or being seen as an organization that's not doing enough. And also GDPR, at least in Europe, has brought a significant focus, because the obligation on any organization who is a data controller to make sure they are processing the information correctly, have the right security controls, is also becoming more and more important. So I think it's there on the boardroom agenda, but there is a different level of maturity how cyber risk is governed at that level. So some organizations have got a very well defined security matrix, a dashboard via which they govern, and quite automated, to be honest. Some organizations, they have not gone on that journey yet. So there is a lot of, I would say, qualitative measures are in place and less quantitative measures in place. But the best way I have seen this happening is it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue, an intimate dialogue with the senior execs and the board, looking at what are they worried about,
Mhm.
looking at what is the concern? So one angle is always the threat, because what are the threats that are applicable to us as an organization, depending on the line of business you are in. So threats which are applicable to a healthcare organization versus professional services versus banks and a construction company, they're going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's what the job as a CISO we do, is to look at all those threats and everything else. But a dialogue is also required with the board, where we talk about what are they worried about? What are the top level risks, a macro level risk that they're worried about? And then explaining to them how we are addressing some of those risks, what controls that we have in place to manage those risks, where some of the gaps are, and showing how we can go from current maturity, towards the target maturity where we need to be. And that's where I think having a discussion of which is based around the risk we face, a maturity. I always think, there is always my way of explaining that is, your risk appetite defines what level of maturity you need on the security capabilities, and that equates to the dollar value. So of one simple example, so one organization, I have been some part of some conversation, one of the organization where board said, we have no appetite for a cyber breach. Okay, now that's the brief which is given to me as a CISO. So if you're telling me the risk appetite is zero, I need to create a model, the capabilities, which is so strong that it does not, we minimize the probability of something going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now that equates to a dollar value. And when we had that conversation, basically board said, oh, that's too expensive. Okay. So basically you're telling me your financial appetite, risk appetite versus affordability, and the cyber, they need to match somewhere. And then you start having a conversation on what is the affordability. And based on that, you say, now that basically means this is the kind of the cyber risk tolerance you have. You can absorb this much of things that go wrong, but not more than that. And that's the kind of intimate dialogue which is required to understand what is the risk appetite, based on that, what kind of security capabilities you need, what that mean in terms of the dollar value, and then taking them on the journey, how you're progressively getting better.
So what I sense from you is that it's a really a maturity model in terms of, here's where we are now as a company, here's where we want to be with respect to our overall information security maturity, and let's quantify the risk and the likelihood of the occurrence and the magnitude of the impact, so that we can make smart decisions together. Yes. About what it might mean if we have a breach or an incident of some sort. It seems to me also that given GDPR, and I think it's 4% of the revenues that are at risk, the potential penalty for violations of GDPR, that there's also something sort of similar to employee safety that comes into this, which is, we have a duty of care,
absolutely,
to really do the right thing, and reputational risk is a big issue for the board.
Yeah, and actually, absolutely right. And I think a number of things I tell to the board is that we need to be in a defensible position, because when regulators come and if let's say there is a breach, if it happens, what regulators are interested to know is that you had a plan, you have been working on that plan, progressively you have been getting better. There is a governance mechanism by which board is having the oversight, and they are providing a challenge to make sure we are making the right progress, because they're not just going to do a point blank 4% of revenue and that's your fine. That is the maximum limit. The way they look at it is, have you been responsible? Have you been executing on the plan? Are the right people making the right decisions? And are you investing in the right areas where those gaps were? And based on that, they make a decision, that organization, because I think regulators have also understood that there's no way we can reduce the probability to zero of something going wrong. But it's about the right steps have been taken, right investments have been made, and the right decisions have been made by the right people. And once you can prove that, you're in a very strong defensible position with any regulator.
Well, we can learn a lot from inspirational journeys like the one you're talking about. It seems that we can also learn a lot from folks who've made mistakes. What are the things that you're seeing CISOs, CEOs, CIOs get wrong in the information security area?
Yeah, I think the one thing fundamentally I think we go wrong in the industry is excessive and obsession with the technology and implementing more and more security, implementing more and more technology and tools. I think we need to start looking at, as I mentioned, people are the best line of defense. So example, if you think about a 50,000 organization,
Mhm.
people, what size of the CISO function or security function is enough? We will always have more threats. We will always see more and more attacks happening. The threat landscape keeps on changing rapidly. It's never going to be enough. So what kind of budget size is the absolute right size? The challenge is 50 people who have got security in their job title are not, they can't be everywhere. They can't be in the train when you're working on your laptop. They can't be in the train when you have got a printed piece of document, or they can't be at home network or coffee shop where you're trying to do that, and maybe in an airport when you're working on the machine, and then you're keeping it easily accessible to anyone they could come and see. So it's about having the right size organization, right investment, but this whole concept of the shared responsibility. Because if each and every individual starts doing their small bit
Mm.
towards understanding why it matters and embedding those behaviors in the way they do things, that goes a long way. And I think that's where what we are doing wrong is in the industry is, if you think about the security budget of X million, how much percentage of that investment we are actually making in educating our people? And I don't mean by that e-learning, computer-based training, but having those conversations,
Mhm.
explaining to them how they can secure themselves, explaining them simple things, because everybody's using technology at home, how they can secure their home network, how can they protect their kids when they are online and everything else. I think it needs to become part of the DNA, how we live in this new digital world, and what's the right way of living in this digital world.
I think it's a wonderful example that we've spent millions and millions of dollars on technology, but the most important things for us to get right are this shared sense of responsibility we have to protect the enterprise and to protect our families, and also to use process and to use our people skills in
Yeah.
terms of that communication to really avoid some of the risks. It seems like what you're saying is there's been an over reliance on technology solutions and not
Yeah.
enough of a thoughtful, integrated approach to,
Yeah.
holistic approach to information security and compliance.
Yeah, culture is not changed by technology. That's what I always say. Culture is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You can't just say overnight we're going to change the culture.
Hmm.
You have to keep on, and you have to start looking at broader, because I spend some time with schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and when I go there I spend also time with some of the parents, because you need to catch that early. You need to start explaining to them why you have a password which is very simple. And sometimes I ask the parents, how many of you have different passwords and how many of you have same password? People raise their hand, and how many have your complex password? Because if you are if you are behaving that in a way, you can't suddenly change completely different in a corporate world. So you
Hmm.
need to start embedding the right security behaviors at the early age, so that when this younger generation is joining the workforce, they are cyber savvy. They know how to behave in this digital world. And as I always like to call, right, people like us, we are digital immigrants, right?
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
have not grown with technology, whereas our kids, they are digital natives. So just like when I was growing up, my parents used to tell me, don't take anything to eat from strangers, don't talk to strangers and everything else. But in this new digital world, it's okay to talk to stranger. You do not
Hmm.
even know the identity of the person who's sitting on the other side. You do not even know the email that you have received is actually it has come from the right person. So I think we need to create that. What are the right principles and the ways of living in the digital world, and what's that cyber savvy culture looks like? And once we start doing that, it will start changing the balance that we have around the way we see the threats. And I think suddenly you change from people being your weakest link to your people being your strongest link.
Mm. So it's a cyber savvy culture that goes all the way from our children in school all the way to the boardroom, where
Yeah,
we understand the basic behavioral changes we all need to make as we take responsibility for everything from our passwords to, sensitive documents that we maybe have physically or have
yeah.
electronically, and how we protect that information. Well, Jatinder, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. And uh, I really appreciate you sharing all of your insights with us, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, Robert. Pleasure.
All right.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.